Thank you, Anthony, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This is our final episode of our international webinar series, and I'm very happy that we have with us Reza Khorshidi, Global Chief Scientist at AIG and researcher at the University of Oxford. Welcome, Reza. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to read out some of your bio here because I think it's incredible and impressive, and it sets a little bit of the tone for our discussion today. So, Reza Khorshidi is the Chief Scientist for global insurance company AIG. He leads the company's AI innovation and machine learning research. He is also Principal Investigator for Deep Medicine program at the University of Oxford's Martin School, which is focused on healthcare innovation and the use of AI in digital health ecosystems. He obtained his Doctor of Philosophy in Computational Neuroscience and Machine Learning from the University of Oxford in 2010, and since then has been leading teams, research initiatives, and innovation projects in both academia and industry. Reza's science team at AIG, a group of machine learning scientists, engineers, designers, and product strategists, are primarily focused on the development of AI-first products. Apps and software services that are design-led and employ machine learning to inform and assist their users. Reza, thank you for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you here on, I think, to discuss one of the hottest topics in the world of fintech at the moment, which is AI and its implications in the finance industry. But maybe just to set the scene, if I could just ask you, Reza, if you could tell us a little bit more about your role and what you guys are doing and your team is doing at AIG and its purpose.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be talking to you and also be among your audience. So in terms of what I do and my team, so we are, if I kind of summarize it into a sentence or two, we are a full stack AI first product unit. So when we say AI first products, we are talking about apps or software services that employ AI to inform and assist their users. By informing, we are talking about kind of telling you stuff when you need them, not necessarily by you asking, sometimes by basically the app knowing that this is the right time to bring this insight in front of you. And assisting is basically doing stuff on your behalf. So probably a kind of like an extremely simplified version of it could get people to think about automation, but actually that's not the philosophy we follow. It's fundamentally a user-centric approach. That's why we say informing and assisting users as opposed to replacing them. Some alternative way of calling it informing and assisting is usually they call it co-pilot, autopilot, but I prefer inform and assist mode of AI as the foundation of AI first product development. So that's what I mean by we are an AI first product unit. And when I say full stack AI first product unit, I'm talking about in order to build such products, we cannot do it just by scientists. We cannot do it just by engineers. We need to have a full stack of expertise. It starts from the creative side, it starts from the design side, and includes things such as engineering, dev, machine learning, natural language processing, and various other specialties such as product management and digital strategy and so on. So when you have all these people together working towards the aspirational goal of informing and assisting the users with the power of AI, that's the kind of team that is a full stack AI first product team. So that's who we are. And we are placed inside AIG's asset management business, and our primary user of our services is our investment business. We are north of $350 billion AUM. And this is primarily in fixed income. The second biggest one after fixed income is real estate. And then after that, public private equity and so on. So that's the kind of portfolio that we are dealing with in AIG Asset Management. And in each of these areas, there could be a variety of angles that machine learning come to the picture and inform and assist our analysts, our portfolio managers, our various decision makers and customers in different parts of AIG.
Okay. I mean, when we're talking about AI, I mean, as you kind of noted in what you've just said, there are various levels to it. You know, I often like the model of the 4 AIs, you know, the augmented, assisted, automated, and artificial, right? And you've talked about what are the sort of levels to which you're using it, and how are can you give us examples of how it's helping to drive better decision making within the industry and the work you're doing in the asset management arena?
Sure. Well, you're right. The term has been kind of used as a catch-all phrase for everything right now, and like when we talk about AI, we're talking about like mostly machine learning. But then when it comes to natural language processing, sometimes natural language processing as well, which might or might not be machine learning related, also is part of the picture. So when we talk about AI in our team, we are primarily up to almost like 99% of the time, you're talking about a combination of machine learning and natural language processing, either together or separate from each other. And within machine learning, of course, you've got topics such as deep learning and so on, which are the kind of stuff that you get to machine learning through a particular type of machine learning called neural networks, artificial neural networks, and so on. So personally, when I think about AI, I think any sort of intelligence that is artificial, it's AI. But of course, personally, I tend to be more and more on the machine learning side of AI, which is the kind of intelligence that you achieve through data. You try to bring intelligence to machine through data, as opposed to symbolic AI or rule-based AI or stuff like that, or expert systems or things like that. So when in my team, when we talk about AI, we are most of the time, 99% of the time, talking about machine learning, either in domains such as probabilistic machine learning and so on, or in domains such as natural language processing and so on. And that's what our focus is. And then when it comes to how that can help, so think about it in terms of decision making in these sort of situations. Let's say you're an analyst, you are, for example, interested in a particular company. There are different ways different companies organize themselves, but let's pretend that we're talking about a typical analyst. Forget about AIG for a second. Let's just say in the world of investments or asset management, there is an analyst that is focused on Apple. How do you change your view about Apple? Is Apple a good company? Is Apple a good investment? And so on. How do you make that view? One way might be you look at Apple's stock return and you look at this historically. So the time series has been going up and up and up. And does that mean it's good? Is this a kind of a good factor in making decision? Or should you look at something that's, suddenly comes a piece of news that says Apple is changing its CEO or is not going to produce iPhone anymore? Should that news play a role in your decision making? Oh, by the way, Apple just filed a quarterly earning report and so on, and actually the business in China is shrinking or something. Then you see that what really is happening is that in order for you to make a decision about a company, you rely on so many diverse sources of data. Some of them historically investment firms have been good at using and have been using, and some of them are brand new that we do not have any sort of prior expertise in, but could or could not be relevant. So when it comes to machine learning, you can do a few different things. One is that you could use machine learning to look at these diverse modalities of these historical and emerging data sets about companies, about their position in the market, about economy and so on, to kind of make up your mind about taking a position or allocating an asset in that direction. Or kind of either do that either through historical mining of the data or through predictions. Like ultimately, if you can predict what the next value of the stock is, or what, for example, Apple's creditworthiness is, and so on, or how Apple, relative to that other investment potential you have, could perform, and so on. All these ways you could use machine learning to make better decisions. So it's all about improving your decision making, and given that the decision making relies on so many modalities of data, many of which are very difficult for a human being to follow unless he or she does an extreme subsampling of that data, there is a hope that machine learning can come and augment that ability to look at everything that is relevant, everything that matters, and create new things that are relevant, but we might not have used historically and so on. So that's kind of a summary of why teams like us can help financial services companies, and how, for example, in a line like fixed income, a team like us could be helpful, that we lend to companies, and through machine intelligence, we have the ability to do the math of that lending better.
I mean, you talk there about using alternative data sets, and I think you and I both agree that this is a huge opportunity for the financial services industry as a whole, and maybe not being grasped as effectively as it could be. But how, I mean, there has to be, I would assume, within your the user base some level of acceptance as to the validity of this alternative data. I mean, is that one of the challenges you face, sort of getting people to understand that you can use these models, bring in alternative non-traditional data sources, combine it, enrich it with the existing data, and provide them with access to better decision-making tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is exactly the way it is and it should be, in a sense. Like if you, for example, right now, I assume after 4 or 5 months or whatever being in lockdown, everybody has got Zoom on their computer. So now we've got N number of people on this call joining in via Zoom. And I wonder if instead of Zoom, we said, there's this app called cupoftea.com or something, and let's use that instead of Zoom. I wonder how many people would have dropped out from this call. So in a way, it's just like, it's the reality that change management is always not straightforward. So there needs to be some degree of a healthy degree of skepticism, because otherwise you're going to make mistakes without any proper due diligence. So therefore, I think some degree of it is there, and some degree of it is actually healthy to be there. So that's why I think when it comes to topics such as alternative data and so on, usually there's a lot of anecdotes of excitement, but systematically going all in is a different story. Like, for example, many people in our industry, and that I'm sure have a lot of experiences of, oh, actually, had I not seen that data point in that call or in that meeting or in that whatever, I might not have made that positive or negative investments or something. So in a way, they kind of know the value of data, because over time, they have seen how a particular element of data helped them to be more successful in their works. And that's why I think, as a norm in the industry, it's a kind of a very quantitative industry, and as a result, it's a very data hungry industry. So the appetite for testing more and more new data is there. But the question is, it kind of comes back to the world of design. How do you design the new experience of being an analyst or being a PM or being a portfolio, being a head of a desk or something in a firm like a asset manager or an investment bank or something like that? How do you redefine that? So while you can have some objective proof from either simulations or from paper trading or whatever that is, to kind of make that expectation on that side to be paired with a seamless user experience, to be paired with enough due diligence that gives you the confidence to put real money behind it. So alternative data compared to the other type of data that the industry has been traditionally using is not that big yet. Like, I mean, there are some estimates that somewhere around $2 billion has been what has been spent on alternative data in the buy side of the industry. And the trend is quite exponential. It's growing quite exponentially right now. And it's not a very old trend. Like, for example, if you look at 2016, the number was around 200 million. Now it's around 2 billion. So in a way, it's quite a big exponential growth in less than almost 5 years or so. We went from 200 million to 2 billion. So, and that's the kind of data we're talking about, like, for example, credit card data. We're talking about mobility data. We are talking about private jet movement data. And so, yeah, anything that is not in the world of like standard financial data, like asset prices or quarterly earning, or even by some measures, SEC filings could be called alternative data to some firms. It really comes down to the fact that they're novel to the industry. So with that novelness, usually there is a healthy dose of skepticism, healthy dose of change management, and a healthy dose of redesigning, reimagining. Is it about better, cheaper, faster way of doing an operation? Is it about transforming an operation and redefining it and so on? So all these things are the reasons that what you had in your question is definitely there, and also it makes sense to be there. But like, for example, if you think about private jet data, that's an interesting one. That there was this hedge fund that apparently looked at the private jet data and saw that some of the J&J executives were parked at the city that is the headquarter of one of the companies that they were rumored to be acquiring.
Okay.
And as a result of that, they ended up reacting to J&J stock according to that. Again, that's not the kind of data you see on Bloomberg probably, but it could be informative at times and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, that's why anecdotes are out there and create some buzz and excitement. But I think just jumping all in is a very risky thing, and there should be some doses of skepticism out there, and there is scientific process to get comfortable with it, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, those kind of stories are quite amusing, those anecdotes. I mean, I had a similar one when I was on the trading desk. or nearly 15 years ago. So we machine learning, we were an algorithmic trading desk, and what we found interesting was the stuff people would post on Facebook. You know, the secretary coming home saying that was a long day of negotiations between blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, right? I mean, what you can find out there, and the power is incredible. With all this data, though, I mean, one of the, I guess, trifling, never-ending problems that the finance industry as a whole has faced is its reliance, to some degree, dictated by regulation and capital adequacy of, you know, the fundamentals of statistics, using 95% confidence intervals, 99% confidence intervals, and what we see time and time again is always that 1% that screws us, right? I mean, one of the things, I guess, with the AI and the machine learning that you're utilizing is how you are addressing sort of known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and how you're able to provide more precision around decision making. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, that is a very good point, particularly when it comes to alternative data. That's even a bigger point. Like, for example, I mean, I could draw examples from the world of medicine and finance, but like, for example, in the world of medicine, right? So when we talk about alternatives, what are we talking about? There was a paper recently in JAMA that showed that the number of push-ups can predict the likelihood of mortality. And if you could do 30 push-ups versus 10 push-ups, the risk is, for example, relatively this much higher or lower. And the kind of stuff like that, if you go to a doctor and say, okay, check, like for a proper checkup, and they say, okay, doctor will never ask you about how many push-ups do you do. And, but if you tell the doctor, I did 30 push-ups today, am I good health? Or say, no, well, I still need to look at your cholesterol. So in a way, that whole thing, it's, I mean, who knows? Maybe actually the push-up is not itself that much of an indicator. It's something else that leads to, maybe you're living in a good neighborhood that encourages you to go to the gym more often. And as a result of that, you became good at push-ups. And maybe the neighborhood is the real factor here. So again, there's a lot of these unknown unknowns when you deal with this data. And also, you don't, from a pure data and quantitative modeling perspective, there's a lot that you don't know what could go wrong with this data. Like, for example, when you look at somebody's cholesterol, you know that, like, if the person has, I don't know, a steak today or not, the cholesterol is not going to be, for example, going from this range to that range. Whereas when it comes to push-ups, if somebody's in the mood or not, the push-ups could vary from 10 to 30 or something. And that's the kind of stuff that is unknown. Like, for example, I mean, in the world of alternative data, I think, let me just look at the precise date. There was this, I forgot what year it was. It was, I think, it was around the Obama's presidential era, where there was this tweet that was going like, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. I'm not sure if anybody remembers that, but that was the time that the indices in Wall Street all dropped, like from, I mean, the one that I'm looking at went from 15,000 down to 14,000 and so on. So you see these sort of sudden drop in the market. I'm actually surprised it didn't drop further. But if your trading algorithms were built historically on certain type of, I don't know, company fundamentals and so on, those metrics are so robust, and your model's reaction to those metrics is going to be very tamed, very reasonable. But suddenly your model is now built on Twitter data. And every now and then comes these random tweets that your model never saw these sort of stuff, but you didn't even have a long history to see these sort of stuff. And then suddenly you end up in a situation where you don't know what's the right thing to do here. And your model might end up shorting a lot of the market. And that whole shorting thing happened somewhere around 115 to 116 in one day. So in a period of a minute, suddenly the whole market went down and came back up. And that's the kind of example that is a good example of an unknown unknown, that historically everything you did was done in a certain way. And you've seen so many ups and downs of it, you adjusted accordingly and so on. I mean, again, you can argue, are you the most accurate or not? But that, we could park that debate. But generally speaking, you know the pros and cons of that approach because you've been doing it for decades. Yeah. Suddenly comes a new approach, Twitter is out, everybody's tweeting, it's wonderful, let's just jump in and, oh, there's a signal, I can get some return uncorrelated to S&P or whatever through Twitter. And then suddenly, the thing that you didn't know is that a single tweet coming from Associated Press, this tweet, by the way, was from Associated Press, could basically drop the whole market. And then if you didn't do the right reaction in that time, you might have lost a lot of money, and some hedge funds might have gone bankrupt, who knows? So that's why I think that the challenges of unknown is definitely big, particularly when you go from a familiar conventional world of data and models to an unfamiliar, unconventional world of data and models. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a big problem, and and it must be taken care of properly. And also that 1% story is an interesting one. And a lot of the time, I think, in addition to all these unknown problems, there's also the problem of approximating that number correctly. So a lot of the time that 1% was believed to kind of mess up the market and so on, was because a lot of these statistical models, for example, could be based on independence assumptions and so on, that you assume everybody is independent. Like, for example, right now, you might, let's just say that you're an insurance company, you're insuring a lot of wealthy individuals in London, let's say. Probably if you do a probabilistic statistical model and so on, you're assuming that the residual noise of the model, I'm getting a little bit geeky here, is a bunch of independent numbers. And that allows you to multiply these numbers and simple math follows. So in a way, the simplicity of the math, when you assume independence, is so tempting that this assumption is made and the rest follows. But the reality is, a lot of the rich people need to live in the same neighborhood. So in other words, if there is a flood in a particular rich neighborhood in London, actually your policies are not independent. They're likely to be hit together. Or if there's an earthquake in London, again, all of them are supposed to be hit together. So that's the risk that actually a lot of these portfolios are going to experience, because the thorough practice of statistics has not been followed that time.
Well, and how, I mean, what I'm interested about, I mean, as I say, I mean, I used to do the machine learning on the trading desk. We allowed the models to make the decisions. You talked about Twitter. There were very interesting incidents. I still remember Michael Jackson's death and the Japanese tsunami, where the information started coming out on social media first. Now, the only decisions we made was to dial down our models because we thought something is happening. There was increasing noise on the social media channels, which led us to do that. But what I find interesting then is in the asset management industry, which I think in general is obviously somewhat late to this game. I mean, hedge funds have been doing this for a long time, but traditional asset management hasn't really embraced this world of AI until very recently, and still a long way to go. How are you also sort of factoring in the UX design and ensuring that the users are sort of effectively engaging with these tools that you're developing internally?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's an interesting one because I mean, there are a few different stories here. One is that, I mean, there are different ways AI could come to the picture and change things. One of them is, I mean, same could be said about digital transformation. When it comes to digital transforming an asset manager or a financial services company or whatever entity that you're talking about, there are two extreme camps usually, and then there's some in the middle. And the extreme camp goes like, let's build the next Titanic of digital transformation. That's like Titanic level commitment, like go all in, change the whole company and so on. And there is another camp that says, well, let's identify a few examples that like maybe instead of changing the whole asset manager altogether, maybe we start from one simple thing here. Like maybe in the, I don't know, fixed income desk, there is a lot of interest about reading SEC files. They already are doing it and so on. Can we just help the analysts to be more better, cheaper, faster at doing that? Like in other words, instead of reading all the tens of pages, can they just simply have a highlighting tool that is going to help them, for example, just read the highlighted parts and so on. How does design come to play? It really is important to see like, okay, how does that fit into the workflow? How does the user data is telling us that actually people are effectively using it or not and so on. So and also, how much text do you highlight? That is, again, another design question, which is like, do you highlight text, so assuming that people are going to have a certain type of hit rate in reading all the highlighted ones, or are people going to just do this, or they're going to still continue doing the status quo? How do you optimally manage people's time with respect to this new test that you're putting together and so on? So I think there are different elements of design in terms of, there is an element of visual design. How do you make the front end more appealing? And there is a information architecture design. How do you, for example, communicate the right amount of information without burdening the users with a lot of numbers and tables and so on in the front end? Then there is the conceptual design, which is usually the thing that we go and test with our users. We design something, take it to them and say like, if a tool like this you had, where we usually might have a few magical elements, like imagine this would be doable and so on. And then would you engage with this tool? What would you like it to be different and so on? Design is usually, back in the day when design was a software company concept, it used to be that users were kind of very specific set of users. Now with design being a very public concept because everybody's using software, everybody's using apps and so on. The concept of design became a lot bigger now. I mean, every design is all, as if you were to kind of simplify the concept of design, it's all about understanding human beings, which are your users. So that's why I think when we talk about design, we're talking about how do we understand people? How do we understand how they do their job? Sometimes it's based on their explicit feedback to us. Sometimes it's based on what we observe they do. And sometimes it's based on actually beyond these two and looking at how they operate on the app. We actually put a feature there that everybody said they love it, but actually when we observe, nobody's using it. So the ability to kind of react to that sort of stuff shows a good design-led corporations, to read between the lines, listen to explicit feedbacks, have your own creative leap of faith sometimes. I say, look, there's this magical thing that nobody's asking me for, but actually it would be good to test it. And don't think that you're guaranteed to be right. Just put it out there, see how people react to it. If it works, then you could actually go further in that direction. So it's all about like testing small increments, listening to users, watching them do stuff, and use your own creative kind of thinking, and combining all these things in a small increments and collecting feedback, because it's important that everything we do is supposed to have some degree of hypothesis behind it. And when we do these as small increments, what we are doing is that we are testing these hypotheses. So we go to users, collect data, and come back and see, has it been good or not, and then make a decision. It's not about just quickly shipping software. It's about quickly shipping so we could collect data quickly, so we could react to data quickly, as opposed to, it's like lean is about agile to weekly shipping of software. Rather, our philosophy is that lean is about quick A/B testing, quick data collection, quick reaction to users, and so on. So yes, I think design has been, for me personally, coming from AI side, it has been quite a big eye-opening story in terms of how systematic one can go about a lot of these things, having seen how many software projects fail because somebody thought they've got it all figured. And there's a famous quote that say, like, product managers who think they know their customers are like male gynecologists. So it's kind of like that. Like a lot of time, a lot of software teams think like, yeah, we've got it all figured. Put AI here, put it there. 2 years of software development, you go to users, no one uses the software. Yeah. Whereas like what we are doing is much more modern, similar to a lot of, probably a lot of startups in your ecosystem are doing, and a lot of tech companies out there are doing. So yeah, that's why design is extremely critical. We put it equally next to AI, the engineering and product management and other disciplines and things.
If I may ask, I mean, a lot of what we talked about has sort of focused, from what I'm hearing, more on the front office sort of decision-making, the investment decision-making process. I mean, one of the critical issues that, well, particularly in Europe, and you're based in London and you're well aware of this, that the European ecosystem is facing is the continuous and rising costs of compliance and regulation. I mean, how do you see the development and use of AI within that sphere as well? So I guess more on the cost side of a business and efficiency side.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who are kind of trying to bring what AWS did to software industry, to financial services industry. Like, I mean, before AWS, what was the development of software like? So you have an idea to build a software company, you go buy a bunch of big hardware, put it in a garage somewhere with an aircon or whatever, and then you start to build software, and everything you do is done there from scratch, and you have a lot of heavy tech architectures and so on that you need to hire and so on. So in a way, startup were so expensive to start with, even in software world. Now with AWS, you say, well, hardware could be just given to me, but I can have hardware on demand, I can have this extra set of like ML flow or whatever, everything you want, you can borrow from different places. If you kind of extremely simplify it, it's been API, everything has become an API of that thing. Yeah. And so on the similar kind of trend, there are a lot of companies who are talking about, well, can we have a compliance API? Can we have a KYC API? Can we have a legal text analytics as KPI, as API, and so on? So there are a lot of these sort of movements that there are startups out there who are doing some of these things. So as a result, that could be relevant as a trend to the question that you asked. I mean, there is a nice talk actually by folks at Andreessen Horowitz that they talk about why every company not far from now will be a financial services company, because they talk about like how all these APIs will be given. So as a result, in the past, if you wanted to be a financial services company, you had to have all these functions embedded. Now, over time, all of these things are being unbundled away, and similar to what happened in AWS could happen there. I mean, you could take it with a pinch of salt, but some elements of it are definitely happening already out there. Like background check is a good example. There's a company called Amphido that is doing it. So then it comes to a lot of legal text. There are a lot of companies who are helping lawyers to analyze legal text. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some elements of it is going to happen, that a lot of back office functions and so on will be helped improve with software, with AI and so on. But again, I don't have enough expertise to kind of cover the whole picture, like what elements might not be able to be replaced with AI and not. But definitely some element of bundling, unbundling in financial services is inevitable, just like in any other industry, because it's all about like, what is the competitive edge? How can you build a lean company on the competitive edge and still be a viable business? And that thought process should be a thought process that gets refreshed and renewed quite regularly, because the world is refreshed and renewed very regularly and very fast. And yeah, I think it's a very good point. And there are a lot of companies out there, and a lot of big companies as well, who are thinking about it. There was this report by JP Morgan where they talked about some of the legal AI or order book AI or something they put out there. So even in the big companies, there are some steps in that direction. Even in our team, we have some of the back office AIs for some contract text analysis and so on that we are doing. So yeah, I don't think it's a forgotten field, but it might be a little bit different compared to the front office examples that you highlighted. So yeah, it's still going to be impacted by AI, but is it going to be just like the front office? Probably not. Is it already happening? Yes, both the startups and big companies are showing examples of it. The end story, I think we have to wait and see, but it will be definitely exciting for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked, and the word has been mentioned so many times in this conversation. Data is the core of this, right? I mean, maybe specifically around data, but then on a more broader basis, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you see? I mean, accessing alternative data, likewise, increasing power asymmetries in terms of data as well. People are beginning to understand that this stuff is valuable and maybe looking to contain or to restrict access to data. We obviously have GDPR regulation in Europe, and other countries also putting in various forms of regulation. I mean, how do you see it? Obviously, I would imagine there's some level of competitive edge that you can, depending on the data you get access to, but what are some of the challenges and opportunities you see around this area?
I think there is a book called Prediction Machines by A.J. Agrawal, and he has a very interesting example that he says, like, imagine if today the world is a mix of coffee drinkers and tea drinkers or something like that. And let's say coffee is $2 a cup and tea is $1 a cup or $2, whatever that is. And let's say that tomorrow morning, suddenly tea drops to 10p or some 10 pences or 10 cents or whatever. In other words, the value of tea drops by a factor of 10, 20 or something. Then suddenly you will have a lot of people who start to say, actually, I drink coffee, but tea is so cheap, might as well just switch to tea. And if you are a tea house that is selling tea, suddenly you say, actually, you've got a flock of customers coming your way because tea is so cheap. And then you suddenly say, actually, I cannot increase the price of tea, but I can increase the price of the sugar that people take with their tea, or the milk they take with their tea, or something like that. So as a result, when the price of something goes down, a couple of trends emerges. One is that everybody starts to get tempted that, actually, there's this cheap new thing. Can I turn my business or my lifestyle or something to benefit from it? The second trend is that when the answer to that question becomes yes, and more adopters of this new cheap thing happens, then the cross sells that go with it become more expensive, like the tea and sugar in this example, and so on. So he uses the same analogy. He says, like, when it comes to AI, people could talk about it in many different ways. Like a computer scientist might talk about codes or whatever. A hardware engineer might talk about chips and all those things. What's this whole craziness about AI? Hardware engineers always talk about these chips, GPUs, whatever. A computer scientist might say about these deep learning codes or whatever. But he says an economist will tell you that it's nothing but a dramatic reduction in the cost of prediction. Because when the cost of prediction goes down and down and down, every business is going to say, wait a minute, prediction is so cheap. Can my business become a prediction business? Like, for example, if I'm a driving business, I would say, can driving become a prediction business? Then, yeah, actually, it's about predicting what a good driver would do given all the sensor data in the surrounding. And there are a lot of proof of concepts that, who knows, maybe soon we'll get to level 5 autonomy. But that's the kind of a philosophy. And when that happens, like if AI is basically economically a force that is driven by a drop in the cost of prediction, and prediction becomes the most tempting thing for a lot of businesses to turn themselves into, to become a prediction business, then the question is, what is the sugar and milk equivalent for them? Data, judgment. These are the things that suddenly become expensive. Like in our financial services example, if you're an analyst or portfolio manager who's really good at pairing judgment with that AI, then suddenly you become a lot more expensive. Or if you are a data provider that can make those AIs a lot more successful, then you can probably increase the cost of your data, because the cheapness that the company is getting there, the cost saving there, is going to be able to be paid to you as a vendor of the data and so on. And that, I think, has the potential to change a few things. One is, of course, the competitive landscape. Like if you are the MasterCard of the world, if you are the Visa of the world, and so on. I mean, again, that's not, depends on what sort of business you are. That might be the data you use or not. But yeah, so if you're Google of the world, you can probably sell a lot more from the location data from your Android phone than you would sell from your advertisement or something. So definitely it's a kind of an interesting dynamic change that historically, as a financial services company, your edge might have been, as you had, a mix of back office, front office, and so on. As time goes on, who knows, maybe some of the data advantages could be your edge. And if you're outsourcing a lot of that data, then suddenly, if data is all the edge, algorithms are becoming commodity and data is all the edge. I'm not saying algorithms are going to become commodity, but assuming some degree of it is happening, then how do you going to keep your edge? Data is provided by someone else. Is this a world we suddenly will have a lot of new emerge? Like, who thought that a internet search company will become a competitor in the vehicle business? Why? Because suddenly Google realized that actually people search for a lot of pictures, and pictures include location pictures. And location means actually map could be a good thing. You do the map, and then suddenly you've got a lot of people on their phone, on their cars, whatever, using the map. And suddenly said, actually, I'm good at navigation. And also through a lot of image search, I'm good at computer vision. And building a car that moves is not that much of a rocket science. The difficulty is making it autonomous. So I could use that as my edge. And suddenly you see the kind of landscape changing. And it's not about who builds the best engine now. It's about who's going to be the first to autonomy. So I mean, these are interesting stuff. And again, everything we say is in the form of a speculation. I don't think anything is factual yet, but definitely we're going to see some of these trends. Data is going to become expensive because AI is going to show more and more success, and AI needs more and more data. Then if we truly get into that world where data is extremely important and data is becoming expensive and so on, I still think like what you said is extremely important, which is it shouldn't be just because data matters, we should just open up the data and everybody should have access to every data. I think there are a lot of stories that oversharing of data could be harming a lot of other things. So I mean, luckily in our world, we are not looking at a lot of these sort of GDPR type data. We look at mostly like the kind of data that is about institutions as opposed to individuals. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of businesses that might have been built on seamless access to a lot of data that over time, like face recognition is a good example. That businesses that were built on face recognition, but a lot of the backlash that is coming have to reconsider. IBM just exited that whole business recently, or some Microsoft and Amazon tried to modify some of that business and so on. So I think similarly in financial services, I won't be surprised if some companies have to rethink some of their strategies, because in the past, there might not have been enough awareness about some modalities of data being easily available or cheaply available. Now in future, they're going to deal with both the compliance reasons and the cost reasons to revisit their strategy. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting story to follow and not let go in crazy, definitely.
I'm going to ask one last question to you, Reza, but and then we'll turn over to some of the audience. I think there's already some questions that have come in, and if there's any more, please start posting them now. And I think sort of a fitting end would be, I mean, you know, we are now still going through an unprecedented event in the history of our lifetimes, if not in this century or the past 100 years. I mean, events like this, you know, do happen clearly as they are happening. How does something like this change or impact your thinking and strategy around the kind of things you may be looking at developing using AI? Does it add to it in terms of new data, new ideas, or does it create problems and challenges?
Well, I cannot talk about very specifics of the stuff that we are doing, but I mean, if we kind of stay within the same question that you asked, but without talking about very specifics. I mean, if you think about what machine learning is, there is kind of like a written between the line assumption. I don't think it's even between the lines, it's almost explicit in machine learning, which is the future rhymes with the past. Like whatever you saw in the past could be generalized to what you're going to see in future. Like if somebody had a high value of, I don't know, this blood variable or whatever, like high cholesterol, high whatever, and a year or two later had this disease, then maybe in future it's going to stay the same. But who knows, maybe a drug could come out tomorrow that is going to stop that. And that means that rhyming thing has been broken. So in a way, events like this, one of the biggest challenges they're going to introduce to machine learning and systematic decision making and so on is that they're going to break that rhyming. So the future rhymes with the past, and suddenly an event comes and breaks that rhyming, and then future is hard to predict because it cannot be easily compared to the past. Then in these sort of situations, you need to be very careful. You shouldn't let the machine look at the historical data and predict and use that prediction as the best guess. I think you need to have a better approach in terms of, depending on what sort of machine learning you do, you could do a few different things. One is that there are techniques that can give you an extent of uncertainty. And if they're trained appropriately, then times like now, if you were to predict, for example, set an outcome in future, you would have been given a narrow range. Now you're supposed to get a bigger range. And usually a bigger range of uncertainty could mean, let's bring some experts to look into this, as opposed to let's blindly execute. So it's almost like an autopilot has to stop because suddenly there is a typhoon coming or whatever. So it's a similar thing that I think that's one way to kind of, for teams like machine learning teams and so on, to kind of react to events like this and not necessarily throw everything out of the window, but just moderate how you're going to put them in use. Again, comes back to the element of design and UX. Like your user experience should be able to accommodate this. The other thing also is that there are some elements of the work that still can continue. Like for example, if you have got an NLP tool that can look at corporate earnings and so on, still that tool can work. The tweak that you might do sometimes is that you might say, can the tool search for some COVID-related words? Like we want to see specifically, or like can we search into that document for specific hotspot kind of mentions or something? So usually there are a few different ways you could react, and sometimes you might have to stop even. Say, look, this whole thing has been built based on the assumption of the rhyming. It's not happening anymore, or the extent of not happening anymore is so big that we have to stop this project and revisit it later. Sometimes you could say, well, the model automatically is capable of doing it. The model gives you the ability to reject some predictions. The model gives you the ability to consult the expert for some predictions. And COVID is nothing but spreading the, increasing the spread of uncertainty, and hence the model automatically is immune to that. The other one is to kind of introduce new use cases in light of this to an existing tool that is so general purpose that is nothing but a bunch of new inputs that you're introducing. There could be a few more precautions as well, but generally speaking, the reactions should be appropriate. I think you should have a good inventory of pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses of all the MLs that you have. As a result of that, try to react accordingly when times like this come.
Okay. Thanks, Reza. I mean, that's been fascinating talking to you about all this. Let's ask our audience to sort of participate a little bit. I think we've got a couple of questions. And Anthony, if you could bring them live, I guess Darren is there and ready to ask his question. Darren, ask your question. Darren, you need to unmute yourself, Darren.
Yeah, it's unmuted. I am. Cool. Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So my question was, just is it AIG's vision to build all AI ML technology in house, or are you looking to partner with startups, or startups coming from the likes of the Loft?
Well, I mean, the answer is definitely well. Depends on how you're going to. Let me just tell you the full answer. So in general, are we open to partnering with startups? Yes. Have we partnered with startups? Yes. Have any of them been in the world of ML? Yes. Now the question is, how do we make that decision and so on? It really is a case-by-case decision. So there is no kind of like a robotic rule that build these in-house, build these outside. But typically, a rule of thumb says that if something some company has done something already nicely and it takes us a long time to build it, or we're going to be more expensive than them in building it, or it's not core competitive advantage to us, and so on, then yeah, why not? We should be open to borrowing from the world out there. Because I mean, if you just purely economically consider it, in a lot of these cases, it's cheaper to buy it from a company than building it in-house. The problem usually starts when our use case might be a little bit special compared to the market and the tool might not be able to address it. Or we believe that we already have something similar and we could just quickly, economically viable way build that thing and so on. Sometimes it could be a little bit of a gray area, but the majority of the time it's quite as black and white as that something that is so easily built out there and we could just simply economically buy it from them and does a good job for us, there's no point in us building it.
Yeah, because as you guys are touching on the conversation, you have the data. You have a lot of data, front, middle, and back office data, and you're completely spot on the unknowns bit, because it reminded me of Amazon and with their HR tool, and when they tried to do the predictions and it became biased against actually females, and when they tried to hire people. And I think you're also I love the conversation about the judgment piece. Specifically when you're looking at compliance type of issues, and where you can get it to predict and highlight things to the user, and then the user can then begin to review and actually make the decision. So yeah, it was really, really good and very, very interesting. And I suppose again, I was just asking that particular question because we're working on specific software and we'd love to talk to you guys, but I'll leave it there.
Drop me a line. Happy to talk.
There we go, Darren. You got your sales pitch in. Well done.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you very much, Darren, for that. Let's go to our resident question asker, Dan. Dan is on the line. It would not be the same if Dan didn't have a question in one of these webinars. Let's get Dan on board here. Where is he?
Hello.
Dan, go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I'm very interested in the cultural changes at a large multinational like AIG. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, you're an incumbent. There's lots of insurtechs out there. Sorry about this. I was multitasking there. Really, the question is, you know, traditionally, companies are set up with departments and they're siloed, and now they need to be digital first and cross-functional and smaller teams to react to the market changes. So how do you at AIG get your people to go from analog to digital? It's almost a mindset, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you asked the question as if it's got a single sentence answer almost, but which kind of puts me in a very difficult position because I don't think there is a one or two or three sentence answer.
It's a transition journey, sure.
Yeah. So I think, look, I mean, you're right in a sense that every company needs to become more and more digital savvy and so on. And I can comment on the asset management side because I'm in that business, but of course, we sometimes work with our other businesses as well. But every one of, because AIG at the top has got three core businesses: AIG Asset Management, AIG Life and Retirement, AIG General Insurance. So each of these three businesses have got their own activities to kind of go in this direction of improving their offering internally as well as external to their customers and so on. So therefore, I can just talk about the asset management side, which, I mean, having a team like us shows the commitment to these sort of directions. But of course, the details of it, I mean, every day we're walking through that detail, like every meeting we have, every discussion we have. And it's not the case that the employees don't like to do it and they need to have somebody. It's just about like, how do you, it's almost like a surgery of some sort, you could say. The patient is alive. You cannot kill the patient and replace things. You have to figure out how you can do it while the business continues. We already are paying, I don't know, somewhere around $100 to $200 million a day on claims. So when you're a business at that scale, you cannot just say, let's pause the world for a couple of days and then we do a little bit of software installing and then come back. So it's all about, like, there are a lot of details that is necessary.
And have you seen, I'm not sure how long you've been there, have you seen more cross-departmental collaboration, more flattening of the hierarchy, all this stuff?
I've been there long enough, but I don't really know how to answer that question because I don't know what metric, how do you define flattening of hierarchy? Is it the number of people from the CEO to the most junior person in the company? Is it how many people are in grade, whatever? I don't know how you define it. It's a little bit of a subjective, and I don't think there, like if you very specifically define it, I'm sure there is an answer somewhere that I can find from you, but it's a little bit tough to answer that question.
Well, it's just, I've been in fintech about 5 years and I'm seeing these big incumbents that move like container ships, and then you've got all these speedboats that are kind of circling. And so it's great to see, and follow up on the further question, it does seem that partnership is the way forward if you can't build it in-house with some of the more nimble players outside of the ecosystem or outside of the center. Yeah. Thanks very much for,
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that's why everything we build is built in a modular way. Even if you build something today, let's say, for example, an API to score a text or something, let's just make that up. If we built a software with a lot of front-end experiences and so on, part of it requires the scoring to happen. And today we use our own API to make that scoring. If tomorrow someone comes out and says, actually, I can improve that prediction by 10%, we just decommission our API, plug the other API in, and then this is as simple as that. I mean, we're not religious about
that agnostic modularity is the key there. Sure it is. Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Last question then, I think, before we close, from Georgie. Georgie, how are you? And please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Reza. Well, regarding regarding the information process, is there a recipe or a rule of thumb or approach to add new types of information? Because there are so many information in the world. Is there a recipe to choose new types of information, or is this a random process? Someone coming to the trading desk and say, "Oh, I have this information. I saw the airplanes, too many airplanes in the air." How does it work in practice?
I think depends on really. Let me instead of category, let me just give you a few examples. So the example that you said, somebody randomly coming to the desk and saying something, I would be surprised if that is ruled out as a possibility, because I mean, it's not random, but it's somebody relevant usually, as opposed to somebody random. Because a random person cannot go to the desk usually. But let's say there is somebody relevant. Let's say you are the airplane data guy, and you come to us and say, "Hey, look, we've got this airplane data. We managed to do this, and look how it's correlated to this." And that's enough for us to get curious. And then we go through it and we have some conversations and figure it out. I mean, might be it's not useful to us, might be actually you're right that it's useful for us. Yeah. The other one could be that somebody says, if only we had something like this, it would be amazing. Maybe we go and search for that, the relevant entities for that data and so on. Sometimes we have to even create our own data because we feel like something is important or something like that. And as in like not out of thin air, as opposed to like as in like searching some places and getting the data from those places and so on. And yeah, I mean there are a lot of different ways. But if I assume by information you mean data, although they don't mean the same thing. But if you mean like modalities of data, how do we think this is relevant, or how do we even come up with that list? It's really all of the above. It could be any different ways. But does this mean anybody who comes to us and says, "I've got this data," we are extremely excited to jump in? It really depends on the. We cannot be the person who goes and proves the value of a random new data without having some degree of conviction about it. And that usually starts from somebody coming to us and getting us excited by showing some examples, or sometimes we ourselves having hypothesis on finding some entities who could help us test that hypothesis, or maybe some scenarios that I have never experienced before. I don't know. But usually these are the two things, that either we like something and go search for it, or somebody already has done something that have got some data and proof of concept that comes to us. And that usually is the beginning of a more thorough due diligence and search process.
If you don't mind me adding, Reza, I think one of the key things we always looked at was context, right? I mean, you can throw tons of data into a machine, and that machine can find correlations with that data. But the question is there context? You know, I can correlate the movement of the stars to the milking pattern of cows, but does that have any relevance and context is the question, right?
Exactly. And the other, like, for example, if you imagine like track and trace kind of concepts, right? another way of kind of defining context, in addition to the causal element that Nasir said, like things such as who has been close, how many people, like if you say in every city in the world, I've got a reliable data that tells you on average how close people walk to each other. I mean, that's so random to be interesting in a normal day, but today probably everybody's going to pay you billions to get access to that data. So it's kind of like something that is interesting today might not be interesting another time. So there's all these factors that play a role for sure.
Okay, Reza, there is one last question which I thought was quite interesting, if you don't mind. We've got one of our great fintech leaders here from Luxembourg, Bert Bowman's on the line. Long time no see, Bert. I hope you're okay. Please go ahead, and this will be the last question.
Sure.
Okay, thanks for taking the question. So yeah, my question is a practical one. So I like the practical application of people actually getting started with something new, and this is a new area for people. And what we see in our business very often, so we do process automation, and we see that a lot of people, they kind of get the concept, but they don't understand enough to actually get started with it, or what you can actually do with it. Or they see huge barriers of implementing something because they see some hurdles. And this is typically a point with machine learning and AI that people consider that you need massive data sets or lots and lots of learning before it actually starts doing something, or they just don't get it at all. Like, what can you actually get out of it? So from a practical side, so you having, being well ahead of the curve, what would be your advice to companies that have not yet dipped their toe into this, so then how to actually get started with that without betting the house immediately?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. You're saying that while there is sometimes a theoretical story that could be interesting, in order to have your users or your potential customers like the offering, it might be a little bit difficult because at the beginning things are so abstract that they might not exactly translate it easily to their day-to-day or their P&L or something.
Well, the thing that most, if you look at financial institutions, for example, most financial institutions are not yet active with this, and you are. And so how do you actually get started with that? So if you don't really even understand what it is capable of, or what it takes to do it.
I see what it, so you're talking about like the top of the house. How do you think this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, if you're unlucky that a CEO or a business leader doesn't have a clue about something, then I think good luck to that company, right? Because I mean, if a company doesn't have the right thinking, even how could they? I mean, it's by chance alone that some good actions might happen. So that's why I think CEOs matter, CXOs matter, because they're supposed to be the source of brilliant ideas. They're supposed to be the source of the strategic directions and so on. And by default, particularly in a big company, when you have a CEO, you expect the CEO to read some stuff, and that means that there are some articles here and there that could spark their attention. There are books here and there. There are networks that they have that could have sparked some ideas in their mind and so on. So that's why I think any good executive should have enough excuse to learn about some of these key trends that are shaping their industries. And so as a result, it would be weird if an executive who's reading, I don't know, a couple of industry articles or has a good network of professionals or watches some right things or whatever, is clueless about some of these key trends such as technology, AI, etc. And despite these, if a CEO cannot react, then I think that's a bad CEO problem. So I think at AIG we were lucky that there were enough executive power behind the story that it came to birth, and as a result of that, there is enough executive power that it gets budgeted and supported. And yeah, I think I mean, I don't know what's the alternative to that. It could be maybe a grassroots approach that employees could remind the CEO all the time that, like, dear CEO, don't you know about AI or whatever? I don't know. But ultimately, it would be hard to imagine if a CEO doesn't believe in something that's going to organic. And because AI is not a cheap thing. You need so many components of a company to be behind it. Like, for example, it's not just about some analyst in the company goes and learns Python side of the desk project and suddenly becomes a source of AI transformation, because they need to buy data. And guess what? Buying data requires procurement, requires compliance, requires whatever. So you cannot just as a kind of like a vigilante go around and align all the compliance corporate functions or whatever. So it's kind of, that's why I think getting all these groups aligned, the only way to start at least is through the executive power and executive support. Then when there, I think there's a lot of creativity that the teams like AI teams or digital teams and so on could bring to the picture. Try to, for example, excite people with some demos, some prototypes, some thinking pieces and so on. And then after that, it really comes down to a few factors. Part of it is the goodness of the team and ideas. Part of it is luck. I mean, believe it or not, luck is important. There's this famous quote that goes something like, if a good product meets a good, if a bad product meets a good market, the market wins. If a good product meets a bad market, market wins. And if a good product meets a good market, something magical happens. So really, it's all about the market. And in the company definition, an AI team, the market for the AI team sometimes could be internal environment of the company, sometimes could be the broader industry that the company is in. And regardless of how good the team is, sometimes the market could be bad. And regardless of how much good ideas they put forward, how much good efforts they put forward, sometimes things don't work. And I think these are the kind of stuff that a CEO usually could use as the foundation of their thinking. That actually, I understand all these things, that regardless, here's my support, or because of these, I'm not going to support it. And this is the difference between different companies.
It's an interesting thing. I think that's also a lesson maybe for some of the tech companies that are doing this, is that if you don't then have the buy-in from the very, very top of the company, don't even bother, right? Because like you said, otherwise it's just satisfying curiosity of people in the organization without ever having a chance of getting something off the ground.
Yeah. I mean, look, these journeys are very difficult. They're not 1 year, 2 year, 3 year journey. It depends on really what you define the journey as. Like showing a cute little thing here and there, that's probably 6 months. But really, truly showing the impact on a big P&L like a multinational or something, that's a multi-year journey. There's a lot of cultural element, there's a lot of talent element, there's a lot of processes element. And that's why I think if a person with the right vision is not behind these initiatives, I agree, it's going to be very tough, because every time things don't work, everybody is going to say, told you so. And then that's the reason that long-term support is important. And that gets you going through a lot of these downtimes and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you.
By the way, Bert, I'm impressed that you managed to get governance.com.
Yes.
That must have been taken from like 10 years ago or something. So
Yes, it's some time ago, yeah.
if you ever want to sell it.
It was before governance became cool.
You made governance great again.
Yes.
Good. Listen, thank you very much to the audience, but most importantly, thank you very much to Reza. Reza, fantastic speaking to you. Great conversation. Very insightful as always. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks to everyone for attending and having all these amazing questions at the end. I look forward to hopefully the next one outside the COVID port.
I hope so too. I hope we get to see you here again soon, Reza. Take care.
Have a good day, guys.
Do you want to close off?